Hello, and welcome to Religion and Life. I'm your host, Ozzy Ostwalt. Learning about religion not only helps us understand faith, it also gives us greater insight into cultural traditions and global events. Here to talk about how religion helps us understand our world is former religious studies major and now political science graduate student, Tristan Winkle. Welcome, Tristan.
How are you doing today?
Fine. It's always fun to have a former student on the program, and you were a double major as an undergraduate in political science and religious studies. I want to come back to your political science work, but I want to focus first on your religious studies major. Tell us a little bit about how you came to study religion, what kind of value it added to your education, what it's like to pursue a religious studies major.
Yeah, certainly. So I have always been interested in religion and how it's played a role on a greater scale in social and political life. And so upon going to colleges, I was interested in what college would help me best understand that. And at the time, I was focusing on trying to be a college athlete, and I went to a school called Geneva College, and I took some introductory courses about Christian studies, New and Old Testament, and studying it there was a little bit more theological based.
Right.
And after my freshman year, I decided to transfer, not for that reason or really any reason in particular other than I had toured Appalachian and I liked it when I was in high school. And I transferred here, and I saw that I only needed a couple more credits to complete a minor. And I took those classes here, and I became extremely interested in the program. And from there, I decided to do a double major in political science and religious studies. And one of the things that I noticed is a huge benefit of being a religious studies major is getting good critical thinking skills, as well as extremely well-rounded writing and reading skills. Because some of the readings you would read in a religious studies program, both academic and philosophical, as well as theological, you don't necessarily get in other courses, because one, they're not always pertinent, or they don't think they're pertinent.
Right.
But it's very hands-on in the religious studies department, and so having exposure to those readings and having to write on them definitely helped me understand what's going on in the world and how to tie it back to where it's coming from.
That's really interesting and important, I think, to note, because a lot of times students will ask me about a religious studies major, and we talk about the benefits. And it's not only the content you're getting, but you are developing skills that are transferable to other areas, the critical thinking skills, the ability to analyze problems, and then to read some very difficult material and to apply it. These are things that you take beyond religious studies, and I guess that you have taken into political science in your graduate program.
Yes, absolutely. From the political science perspective, a lot of readings and writings are research-driven, and as well as, religious studies is also, but it's encountering a lot of statistical measures and math and methodology and how to develop research. And so that's one side that I've been able to pick up from that, or from the political science side, and it's been really helpful in terms of reading and writing. But I feel like as a religious studies major also, I have a little bit of an extra step over other just straight political science majors, just because I'm able to write a little bit more elaborate and think a little bit more critically than beyond just a research focus.
That's wonderful. Yeah, so you mentioned that when you were at Geneva taking religion courses, that those courses were a little bit more theologically based than the types of religious studies courses you encountered at Appalachian. And sometimes I think students coming to Appalachian don't understand the perspective of a religious studies course or a religious studies degree. Could you talk a little bit about the difference between studying religion at a state university in a religious studies program as opposed to studying religion at a Christian college like Geneva, or even in a church setting or a religious setting?
Yeah, so one of the things that I often encounter when I tell people that I was a double major in religious studies is they're like, "Oh, are you planning on doing like becoming a pastor or going to divinity?" And but that's not what my intentions are. But one of the big differences is it's very value based from a theological perspective.
In a Christian college.
At a Christian college,
Yeah.
yes. And so not only do they want you to read these readings and write about them and think about them critically, but they want you to do so with an attached value. And not only to do that, but also apply that to your daily life.
Right.
But as opposed to that, at a state school like Appalachian State, it's secular in nature, but it's also thinking critically, not just in terms of values and morals and application, but also beyond that. How does this apply to the entire world? It's an academic study, and I think that's what separates looking at it from like a theological perspective versus a purely academic perspective.
So you're not really trying to determine what the truth or the true perspective is. You're trying to uncover how religion operates or functions in society and culture.
Absolutely, yes. I definitely think that's very true and very apparent when you take one course in one setting and a course in another. From a theological perspective, it's very this is what's true. This is how the world works.
Right.
But from an academic perspective, it's kind of the same in understanding how the world works, but the greater picture of it, like what this religion influences people to feel, think, and do, and how does this religion play a greater role than just providing truth and meaning to a certain group.
So religion then becomes, actually, from that perspective, very important for us if we're to understand culture and society and political systems, I would suppose. And you mentioned earlier that you studied some Eastern traditions while you were here. So is there a sense in which, just as an example, if you're studying Chinese politics, you have to know something about Confucianism, I would think, in order to understand the culture and the mindset and the worldview.
Yeah, what's very interesting about China is that China is a communist country, which traditionally opposes the use of religion or the institution of religion. But Confucianism and Buddhism play such a huge role in how their politics is developed in form and function, irregardless of whether it's a communist state.
Right.
And even though it's a communist state, religion plays a huge role in the daily lives of Chinese citizens.
Right. So if you're in any kind of field, if you're a political scientist or if you're in business and you're working in China, it sounds like that it would be to your benefit then to at least have a working knowledge of Confucianism, Buddhism, and other Chinese thought systems.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And increasingly what's on the rise is Christianity in China, as well as growing Muslim communities.
Right.
So it's the benefit of having a religious studies degree is being able to be versatile in understanding how people and cultures work.
Right.
And it's really important, and it's really helpful, and it's very enlightening.
So when you were a student, you studied Eastern traditions, you studied Christianity,
Yeah,
Islam. Did you get a full kind of perspective?
Yeah, I did get the full perspective. However, not so much as a specialization as I think would be more that I would have benefited more from. I did a very general and broad interest into religion, so I studied the Eastern traditions and the Western traditions, kind of getting a dose of each. So by no means a specialist, but I do have a general working knowledge of how some things work, but also what's been really helpful with being a religious studies major is that I have the general knowledge of how these things work, but I also have the knowledge of how to access the ability to learn more.
Right. So I want to extrapolate a little bit from our brief discussion about China. We would say that China is a communist country.
Yeah.
Yet we need to understand certain religious traditions in order to better understand the worldview of not only the Chinese people, but the Chinese government. Could we say the same thing about the United States, even though we wouldn't want to say the United States is a Christian country? Is it important to understand Christianity, maybe Judaism, in order to understand governmental systems and civic organizations and so forth?
Yeah. So upon the foundation of the United States, they had the idea that the church and state would be separate. And on paper, for the most part, it is, even though most of our Bill of Rights and civil rights were derived from I would go out and say a little bit of a Christian inspiration. But it's extremely important to understand Christianity, Judaism, and other religions in regard to how the function of American governance works.
Right. Yeah. Can you give me an example of that? Say something from the Christian worldview that has fed into the way the U.S. government.
Certainly. So one of the biggest phenomena is with the 2016 election of President Trump, and looking at moral Christians and where they fall into things in terms of politics. A lot of people were looking at, well, how could Christians vote for Donald Trump if he's saying and doing these things? But those people who were saying that weren't seeing the greater picture of why Christians were voting for Donald Trump. There was an open Supreme Court seat, which was fulfilled by a Catholic judge. Right. Who a lot of people would like to reverse decisions like Roe v. Wade, and the Christian right would like to benefit from having a president who could appoint somebody to a seat that would benefit them. Right. And he ran on issues that were appealed to the greater whole of Christianity. Yeah. And that's a most recent issue that I could think of. I mean, there's more recent issues, but definitely one of the most salient.
Well, that's actually a great example because you have a block of voters who would identify as Christian who might not necessarily approve of some of the values that one of the candidates for the executive office would hold. Yet, looking beyond that at another branch of government, the judicial branch, they're willing to maybe overlook some of the discrepancies in values in order to, as you said, hopefully put a conservative judge on the court.
Right.
Yeah, so you got a really interesting mix of political structure and political campaign and religious and ethical values.
Yeah, religion is extremely important in coalition building in the United States, especially in politics. It's interesting. I'm working with a professor right now we're looking at African American elected representatives, and we're taking those elected officials and comparing them to survey data of respondents that listed themselves as African American and Christian. And one of the things that we're finding is that these African American representatives are best representative of not only African American respondents and voters and their religious values, but also white and other races who have Christian values or socially conservative religious values.
So the religious coalition that's being built here overweighs other factors that might keep groups apart.
Correct, yeah.
So I'm thinking of another example where I think that was true. So, for example, in the 1980s, there was a organization called Moral Majority, headed by Jerry Falwell Sr. And one of the platform issues of the Moral Majority was the reversal of Roe v. Wade, and they were very much kind of anti-abortion, pro-life group. And that was an evangelical organization, but they were able to build a coalition with the Roman Catholic Church, which is also very much pro-life. So there you've got coalition building across here, an evangelical group and a Roman Catholic group based on common
you often
values.
see it among very social justice oriented African American churches. A lot of them work hand in hand with conservative Christian groups that are most likely white, and they're working together to reverse decisions like Roe v. Wade. But when they come down to other political and social issues, they're completely different.
All right, so you mentioned earlier the Bill of Rights, and we could look at that, say the First Amendment is obviously going to be relevant for any discussion about religion and politics.
Yes.
So in the First Amendment, I'm going to paraphrase here so you can maybe correct me, but it says something like that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. So there's no official state religion. And also regarding the free exercise of religion. So we often talk about freedom of religion, religious practice. And there are all sorts of interesting court cases that have revolved around, particularly the freedom to practice religion. Is that still an important issue in contemporary America? Or are there issues and cases out there that revolve around the First Amendment?
I think it's extremely important, and I don't think it's going to go away anytime soon. It just comes down to whether or not there's going to be a decision made that the government will either support a religious matter or oppose a religious matter in a lot of these issues. Like, for example, the Colorado baker who declined to bake a cake for same-sex marriage.
Right.
The decision there was to either support his religious views and prolong the free exercise of religion, or to not, and to take away his religious rights. And it's a very interesting rhetoric. It's certainly a slippery slope.
Right.
I mean, France, for example, is vehemently against any sort of establishment of religion, and they have even gone to limit the free exercise of religion to maintain that there is no established religion in the country of France.
So France is, I guess, more willing to impinge upon one's perceived right to practice religion as he or she would want, out of fear that there would be too much of a coalition between state and religion.
Church. Yes, yeah.
That's interesting. Yeah. So again, along kind of the First Amendment issue, we talk about freedom of religion, and by that we mean the rights of people to worship as they wish. There's I don't know if you're familiar with this group or not, but there's a progressive group. I think it's called the Freedom from Religion Foundation, or Freedom from Religion, and one of the goals of that group is seemingly to kind of rid the public square of anything that smacks of religion. Is it necessary, do you think, and I guess this would be an establishment issue, is it necessary to free public life completely from religious expression, or is this part of that very delicate balance that you're talking about?
I think it's very much part of the delicate balance. And what's interesting is, and I think what plays a huge role in this, is social infrastructure, and seeing how that develops and plays a role in the social political life and how it affects the climate of that. I know one of the things I always think is extremely interesting is it's called post-narco-urbanism, and it's in Colombia.
Post-narco-urbanism.
Yes.
Okay.
And I know it's a wild example, but so in Colombia, a very Catholic country, after the kind of narco age kind of fell apart, one of the first things that they gathered all of the city planners and social activists, and one of the first things they wanted to come up with was how to build social infrastructure to make people happy, to appeal to the public life. And this is where an example where the delicate balance doesn't play a role, but one of the things that they did was they put a statue of the Virgin Mary in every train station. And their objective was to help people feel better and make people feel happy and be nice to each other.
Right.
Because their inspiration was that everybody's mean when they get on the train in the morning.
But if you have the Virgin Mary watching you, you're much more likely to behave.
Right. And so that's, and by no means are they a theocratic country, but they lean on their religious values to guide their public life. But in the United States, it's harder to have that,
Right.
Because there is no establishment, and nobody wants to say that there is or isn't because of what they could rile up.
Right.
And but then the free exercise comes in, and it's where can we make people feel happy? And
So if you try to put a statue of the Virgin Mary or Jesus or any religious figure, as far as that goes, in the United States in public places, you would run into difficulty based on the Establishment Clause of the First Amendment.
Very much so.
Yeah. So we have nobody looking over our shoulders to make us act properly, and maybe that's part of the problem.
It's an interesting psychology and sociology and all kinds of social sciences tie into this. Especially, I mean, religion at its core is just like, how do we navigate the general will?
Yeah. What do you think, just as our time's running out here, what do you think is the most pressing issue in public life today as it is relevant to this intersection of politics and religion? Or maybe not the most relevant, but irrelevant.
I think there's several issues that are extremely relevant about the intersection with religion and politics. Well, for one, anything that can be made political, which is most things, the religious voice and the non-religious voice will have a huge factor and say in whether that becomes a policy, whether somebody becomes elected or appointed. And so at that, I think the three most important intersections is that we're going to see is between religion and the sciences, religion and the environment, and I guess I can't think of a third one. There's just so many to really say that are important.
Well, you mentioned one with the Colorado bakery example. So LGBTQ civil rights, for example, has been much in the news lately. So.
And I noticed when we were originally talking about doing the interview, one of the questions you posed was, what will the future of religion look like in America?
Yeah.
And personally, I think it looks like it might be going away for a short time period, but I don't think that's the case. I don't think religion and non-faith and secularism are particularly the future, or non-religion. I mean, I think more socially diverse and accepting religion is going to be down the road.
Yeah, so that's been a huge debate among sociologists of religion since the 1960s, at least. Many sociologists look at the data, and now we have some people in our department looking at millennials and Generation Z, and there seems to be, just on the surface of things, a falling away from faith. But I think what you're suggesting, what others are arguing, is that there's something much more deeply ingrained in our society. And that while religion is definitely changing, we're in a transition period. That doesn't necessarily foretell the demise of religion in America.
Certainly. I think that there is a significant number of people searching for a sort of religious and existential meaning. However, I don't know if they're quite satisfied with traditional religions. And I think what will the future will look like is that there will be more inclusive religions that will always be continually evolving to what society wants them to be.
Right, and that's an important point. Oftentimes people tend to think of religion as a non-changing, eternal, static thing, right? That truth doesn't change and the way people believe shouldn't change. But in reality, all religions do evolve and change in response to cultural forces and societal forces, and there's this ongoing interplay between culture and religion.
Yeah, and it's I don't think it's slowing down. I think as technology and media allows us to develop opinions and ideas faster, and as our populations grow and in some ways become more connected yet disconnected, the evolvement of religion is just going to keep pace with it. It's going to change just as quickly, if not more so.
Yeah. So in our final moments here, you'll be writing a master's thesis, I suppose, or doing some research.
Yes, certainly a lot of writing.
Will it involve religion?
Yeah, I would like it to.
Yeah.
That's as a first year in the program with another year left. That's something I need to figure out in the next couple of weeks.
Right. Okay, no pressure here.
Yeah, that's okay. One of the things that I'm very interested in is where religion plays a role in policy support and in voter turnout. And I think those are two things that I can develop into writing a master's thesis. And if not for my thesis, then research down the road for sure.
Boy, developing a connection or some sort of connection between voter turnout and religion, that would be very interesting. You've already done some work there, or
a little bit. Like I said, I was working with a professor in the political science department looking at African American voters and elected officials and how religion plays a role. And one of the ways that we kind of became connected was that he's a specialist on presidential and voting, or presidential politics and voting turnout, and my interest was in religion and politics, and we sat down and we combined the two. And so I have a little bit of work in that area, and I've designed some research for a couple courses that would evaluate social policy support in Mexico, for example. So I have a little bit of experience, not too much. It's something that's still developing, and I'm excited to continue.
Well, I'm excited to see where this takes you.
Thank you.
It's always nice to see one of our own doing well, and you certainly fit that bill.
Thank you.
I think you might have a PhD in your future.
That's the goal.
That would be
so.
wonderful. So we're looking forward to seeing where your research takes you, and we're certainly very proud of you.
Great. Thank you so much.
Maybe have you back in the future.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thanks for coming on today.
I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And thank you for joining us on Religion and Life here at App TV. I want to thank my guest again, Tristan Winkle, who took time out of his busy schedule as a graduate student and now has to run off to class, right? Yes. And I hope you'll join us next week when I welcome Dr. Diana Pasulka, who will take us beyond the stars in search of extraterrestrial life. Until then, this is Ozzy Ostwald.